like the Epstein stuff. Look, I'm not optimistic that any of this stuff's ever going to come out. Same thing with the Kennedy stuff.
The Kennedy stuff, we've gotten some pretty wild stuff. So they've literally,
the evidence is out, right? If you want to find it, the documents have been uncovered and declassified. If you actually,
and we're still getting more documents though, because there's this was decades of hidden information. By the way, the Secret Service did destroy certain documents that they were told not to.
Mm-hmm.
Why would the Secret Service do that? Seems kind of shady.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still documents that we're still gathering to include stuff that we're getting from the presidential library. So we're still, and as soon as we get it, we upload it to the archives. But it's like, how many people are going to go through that? So we're doing it in the name of historical significance and transparency, but a lot of people just have moved past it because it's not a hot trending topic anymore.
Have you ever talked to John Newman?
Mm-mm.
I think he's a professor at the University of Washington, and I think that's the name of it, in Washington, D.C. And he is, out of all of the JFK experts and authors I've talked to, I asked them, I'm like, who's the top guy that knows more about this stuff than anyone? And they all say John Newman, because he's the guy. All JFK authors, they base their books on previous books, right? Instead of going to the source, they read a bunch of other books and they compile their book, right? They all base their books on this guy's work, on this guy's books, John Newman. He has literally schizophrenically drawn out the map of everything that's happened. Yeah, it's the Always Sunny meme. And he's read every document forwards and backwards.
For Oliver Stone's film. I interviewed Stone.
Yeah, he was he was for the first JFK film, he was a super advisor for it.
Yeah, so we work with Jeff Morley and
he knows Jeff Morley.
Yeah, so Jeff Morley, he's like a Bernie Sanders Democrat. So I mean, this is truly bipartisan, but they won't tell you that. So
yeah, it's definitely bipartisan. Obviously, it's bipartisan. And so one of the biggest smoking gun that John Newman explained to me was that Oswald, a 2-time Russian defector, Soviet defector, was on the parade route on November 22nd. He had the highest level of FBI flash stops on his file. He had an active CIA file and an active FBI file.
They're observing him and they lied to Congress about it.
Observing him, on the threat list, he was at the top.
Yeah, they were reading his mail. We have all that evidence.
They were tracking him through New Orleans, Dallas, Mexico City, and Newman got all of the files on him, all of the cables that were going between the CIA desk in Langley, between the CIA desk in Mexico City, and he has the evidence of all of them, and he has all the people who signed off on them. So there was one lady who was the counterintelligence liaison for the CIA. Her name was Jane Roman, and she was still alive, maybe 10 years ago. And I think Morley and Newman went to go visit this lady, Jane Roman. Because there was all these files on one hand that were saying the FBI was monitoring him through New Orleans. Yep. And the CIA, FBI and the CIA, through New Orleans, Dallas, and New Mexico. And then there was another CIA file I think it was maybe a week before they shot the president, that was signed off by Jane Roman, the same lady who's signed the other ones, saying that we have no contact or no records of Lee Harvey Oswald since January of 1962, which when he was still in the Soviet Union. So they went up to her and they interviewed her. They say, look, why did you sign off on this, saying that there was no contact with him or no records on him since 1962, while over here there are these other records of him. You guys were following him up until the day he shot the president. And she stopped and grinned, and she said, this is obviously evidence of something about Lee Harvey Oswald that they wanted to keep very close to the vest.
Yeah. So I actually went and met with the ambassador to Russia and his team. And what's interesting is when Lee Harvey Oswald went to Minsk, they actually had him under observation. They did a full psychological profile on him, and they thought he was a freaking kook. Yeah. And they're so the Russian government at the time was very friendly with Kennedy. And I'll get into this in a second, because in the 90s, the investigative body of Congress that was looking back into the JFK files after Oliver Stone's movie tried to get these documents from the Russian government, and they said no. So we've been the first delegation since the 90s to meet with the Russian government, which is separately crazy. Like, why have we waited that long to meet with another superpower? By the way, and this could go back into like 2016, the Russia collusion thing was total nonsense. We know that for a fact. But look at how it's impacted and affected foreign policy. So this is something completely separate.
Right.
So I met with them and they agreed to release these files publicly on their KGB findings, but they actually brought these documents to the American government at Kennedy's funeral. The ambassador to Russia brought these documents saying, this is who we think that actually did it, because they had these people under surveillance as well, as like a, hey, we want to be friends. Like, let's figure out who killed the president. And we never got those files. I think that the CIA destroyed them. And so all of that to say that in the psychological profile that the KGB put together on Oswald, they thought he was a kook. He was not a good shot. There's a famous story of him being under surveillance in Minsk, Russia, and he tried to go hunting to feed his family, and he couldn't shoot for shit. And so they're like, there's no way that this guy could actually pull the trigger. And then in addition to that, he showed up to the Russian embassy in Mexico City with a pistol, and the head of the KGB was like, you're crazy. Like, they thought he was just 5150 nut job.
Right.
So yeah, he was a patsy.
Yeah. This was the text from John Newman that he basically wrote up the story about how him and Jeff Morley went to visit Jane Roman, and she signed off on the October 10, 1963 CIA HQS cable saying that the latest HQS, whatever, I don't forget what that stands for.
Headquarters?
Maybe. Information on Oswald was dated to May 62. She replied, yes, I'm signing off on something I know isn't true. And then she asked what she thought about the false HQS cable from John Whitten. She replied, to me, it's indicative of a keen interest in Oswald held very closely on a need-to-know basis.
Oh, yeah. No, we recently, too, found out last week. I'll actually read this to you. So I actually went on with Morley to talk about this because this was a finding that was released in the JFK files.
Pull up the cable, Steve. I think I sent you a photo of the actual there
so this one actually broke on Monday. So this was on Will Harvey's travel log. So let me get through this. Hold on. So there was a CIA assassination program at the time known as ZR-Rifle. And ultimately what they found out is that an individual by the name of Harvey had defied Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the fall of 62. Harvey was transferred to Rome in June of 63, and within 2 months after he was assigned to Rome, he had received authorization to covertly travel back into the United States. And it became apparent in this release of the document that the CIA told the Church Committee in 1975 that Harvey did not use the alias William Walker after June 1963, which we now know is completely false, and that the FAA in supporting Harvey's secret travel in late 1963 is entirely new, unfounded documents. So he basically used a fake name to travel back to the United States running a assassination program, and just so happened to be here when JFK was assassinated. And this was been released. So we're still getting new documents, and this is just the length of time that it's taken for the task force and really Morley's team to kind of go through all this.
Yeah.
But all that to say, when I first started the task force, they thought that we were going to post a bunch of conspiracy theories. When I said that there was multiple shooters, they said that I was pushing conspiracy theories. Yeah. And I was right. And so we're interested in facts, and we can let the American people draw their own conclusions.
Yep. It's pretty crazy when you really dig into the I like to call them the boring details, because it can be boring reading through some of these old reports.
But the director, Radcliffe, actually has a great perspective. He goes, I'm the new director. So whatever sins were committed of past agencies, I'm not going to take responsibility for, and I'll let the American people know the truth. And so he's been
but does he have the power to let the American people know the truth?
Well, yeah, so previous directors, even though presidents had authorized a release, did not release the files. But we have Tulsi Odiani, Radcliffe at the CIA, and Patel at the FBI. So under their direction, they can push for the authorized release of these files and not undermine the president. This was all previously stonewalled. In fact, there was documents that came out in the Kennedy release that Biden had also tried to release, and the National Archives refused to release them.
Really?
Yeah, so there's been a big push for this. And we're going through, we have the MLK hearing next, so we're going to be going through that, working with some expert investigators. And
I think they're just going to wait for everybody to die. I think there's a couple people still alive. Once they're dead, maybe.
They released the MLK files and they released the RFK files. We just haven't had a chance to fully go through this stuff yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever spoken to Danny Sheehan? Mm-mm. He's fascinating. He's a Harvard lawyer who was he worked on the Pentagon Papers. He worked the Pentagon Papers thing, all about the the Watergate scandal.
Oh, that's an interesting thing there.
He look up all the cases Danny Sheehan worked on. A bunch of really famous cases. And he is like a galaxy brain on the whole UFO topic and the JFK topic. And I had him in here. We were talking about JFK. He was explaining to me basically how like the mob and the let's get the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate burglary.
I've seen him
Karen
at my
Silkwood case
on UAPs.
The Iran. Oh yeah, he was on the Iran Contra scandal. He deposed everyone in Iran Contra.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, he's an OG. He's a legend when it comes to all this stuff. But you know, because he was around and deposing all these people during this time in the middle of the Cold War, he had like firsthand knowledge of all the people that are peripheral to the Kennedy assassination.
And there's a lot.
And yeah,
was a lot.
It's crazy how connected it all is.
Well, speaking of his work, I mean, he reminds me of George Knapp. So at the UAP hearing, George Knapp is like, yeah, I smuggled these Soviet files on a program called Thread 3 that was looking into UAPs. It was like a UAP task force because they had a lot of weird interactions in the Soviet era. And we were like, well, how the heck did you get these out of Soviet Russia? He's like, well, I just ripped off the top paper and stuck them in my bag.
Yeah.
I'm like, you probably deserve a star at Langley for that. I mean, like, you weren't at the agency, but the fact that you're able to smuggle out these like Soviet era documents to, you know, the United States is pretty wild.
But Danny was explaining to me how these anti-Castro Cubans were working for the CIA.
And tied into the mob too.
And they were tied into the mob as well. And basically when Kennedy did the Bay of Pigs thing and basically didn't send the air support and all that stuff, the Cubans despised him. They were training hit teams, and he was calling them triangular hit teams, the CIA was in Miami, to take out Castro. And there was, I forget the names of one of the guys who was in those triangular hit teams, who was a Cuban dissident, went to Cuba twice to try to assassinate Castro. They failed. And Danny was like, they basically used these same Cuban hit teams to assassinate the president. And he goes, I have evidence that these Cubans were there on the route in 1963. And I was like, that's weird. I'm going to interview an ex-CIA anti-Castro Cuban guy who's like 95 tomorrow.
Oh, no.
He goes, what was his name? I go, Felix Rodriguez. He goes, oh, he was on that team. And I like almost fainted.
So did he kill Kennedy?
I didn't want to ask him.
You should have totally asked.
But I went in there. I went into his museum in Miami, and he had all these like Cuban armed commandos everywhere. And I was just like, one guy had an office with a picture of Kennedy and like a strike through his face. And yeah, it was crazy. But
yeah,
it's all
I think
connected.
a lot of people sought to benefit from his elimination.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because, you know, obviously we're very, you know, we also know that the Kennedy family is still around, so we want to be respectful of that. But also the American people deserve to know if there was a coup against the American people in the U.S. government by an intelligence agency or people connected to an intelligence agency. So,
well, long story short, John Newman, his overall theory on this whole thing is that it was a military coup. He thinks it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff who wanted like an all-out nuclear war with China and Russia.
Oh, they definitely, what I can tell you is from the Russian perspective, the CIA did not, and this is just based on the documentation that we've also gotten from the release of the files, there are certain actors within the CIA that did not like that Kennedy was so openly friendly with the Russian government. And I think that they viewed him as a communist sympathizer. And he did not have his cabinet with supporters, and his own vice president at the time, I believe, was seriously undermining his efforts. So he had his brother, but then they killed his brother too.
Right.
So would they turn a blind eye if they knew about an assassination attempt? Probably, because they looked at him as a sympathizer. He also was at the time working on he wanted to do a joint mission with the Russian government and American astronauts to the moon. A lot of people don't know that. And so he was very, very friendly with the Russian government and was back channeling communications, even despite what the CIA was trying to push in Bay of Pigs and all that, because they did want war. And then a day after Kennedy was assassinated, we signed ourselves up for Vietnam.
Yep. Yeah.
LBJ did that.
There's these PSYOP meetings, not PSYOP. It's called, I think it's like SCIOP meetings. I forget what it stands for, but there was these meetings that him and RFK were both in, where the Joint Chiefs, Lemitzer and Maxwell Taylor, had this crazy plan, because that was the point in history where we had the most nukes and the Soviet Union had the least amount of nukes. Like that was when they first started to build up their arsenal. So we thought we could get away with just nuking half the planet
Yep,
and getting away with
not
it.
good in theory. We don't
And he
ever
didn't
want to
wanna
launch
do
a nuke. Yeah.
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 And then he was obviously back channeling with the Russian president and trying to stop all that. And then, you know, obviously like the CIA was involved. A lot of people like to say the CIA killed him, but John's theory is just like the CIA, there was certain elements of the CIA who were involved in the cover-up.
Exactly. So definitely certain factions involved in the cover-up. Obviously, you can't just like blanket label an organization. However, the CIA has done some interesting stuff. And I think when you look at some of the declassified files on their readingroom.gov website, you can see for yourself what they've looked into. It's very wild reads on a Friday night.